Thank you very much, Nicole. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, to our third edition of Friends of Foresight. Yes, my name is 𝙀𝙓𝗙𝗙𝗙𝗏, and I welcome you all to this session from Bangkok, Thailand. So today, the third edition will actually be on essential risks, and a topic that I personally find very interesting and a topic that definitely needs more attention. I feel more like a student today. I haven't really paid too much attention to essential risks, but I'm just a moderator and I'm joined by 5 people who know much more about the topic. So I also welcome many fellow futurists and people who are interested in future thinking and foresight. And I think we are already more than 70 people and still more people are joining. I was very excited, I must say, to know that the Millennium Project, the Association of Professional Futurists, and the World Future Studies Federation collaborated last year and sent an open letter expressing a statement of support for our common agenda and urged the United Nations Secretary General Guterres to conduct a feasibility study to establish a UN Office for Strategic Threats and to coordinate a global-wide research and action to prevent human extinction in the context of existential risk and threats. So this proposed UN office, and I think we will hear much more about it, will lead and facilitate the identification of threats that endanger the future of humanity and explore ways on how to prevent them. So 3 global futures organizations commit to collaborate on its implementation and by making available their expertise, their research, and their studies of over 26 years. So today in this session, we want to learn more about what are essential risks, which risks actually we are talking about, what is it, our role as futurists, how can we contribute, and much more. So I want to introduce you first to our speakers one by one, but then I will call upon one of them to do a provocation or setting the context, and then we will hear responses by the others. Maybe I will follow up with one question, and then I invite all of you already during the provocation to write questions or comments in the chat. And I will call upon Nicole, who is also from APF, to monitor the chat, and we try to identify interesting questions from the chat, and we'll ask our panelists to respond to them in a precise and swift way so that we can answer many of them. We have only 1 hour altogether, so let's get right on it. So our speakers today, and ladies first, is Rosa Alegria. She's the director of the Millennium Project in Brazil. She's a pioneer in futurism in Brazil. She has worked as a professional futurist more than 20 years. And I learned that she's one of the most recognized female futurists in Latin America. She's also responsible for Teach the Future in Latin America and the Director General of Teach the Future Brazil. And there is so much more to say. Any of them, you better Google them because I can only give a few sound bites. Secondly, we are joined by 𝗙𝙂𝗙𝗎𝗓𝗏. He's joining us today from Norway. He's originally Norwegian, but I think he's based now for the Foreign Ministry. I just learned that in Berlin. He is the president of the World Future Studies Federation and the co-editor-in-chief and co-founder of the European Journal of Futures Research. Thank you very much for joining, Eric.
Hello.
Then another person doesn't need much introduction is Dr. Jerome Glenn. He's the CEO of the Millennium Project, and you all know it's a global participatory think tank with 50 nodes around the world. And this Millennium Project is also known for the world famous State of the Future annual report for the last, I don't know, Jerome, I think 18 years.
25.
But many who, oh, you see, time is passing. And many of you know him also as probably the inventor of the Futures Wheel or the futuristic curriculum development and the global futures intelligence system. Welcome, Jerome. And also joining us today is Duncan Carsbacks. He is a counselor for strategic foresight at the OECD, and his mandate is to strengthen strategic foresight across the OECD and bring a stronger futures focus to the global dialogue on key policy issues. And he just joined on the minute. I know you jumped out of a call, so we didn't have time to talk before. Very much welcome, Duncan. And last but not least, representing our hosting organization for Friends of Foresight, the chair of the Association of Professional Futurists, Professor 𝗙𝗏𝗓𝗄𝗏. You might notice he's the first non-American and Asian chair of the Washington-based APF. And he's also a global advisor to the UNESCO and Dubai Future Foundation. He is the UNESCO chair candidate on anticipatory governance and regenerative cities. And he's also the founder and chief futurist of the Center for Engaged Foresight. And there is much more to say. But thank you very much, Sherman, for calling upon me to moderate today. So without further ado, you see we have very knowledgeable people. And I know the audience is consisting largely of futurists. We also have some people who are just attracted by the topic. So please keep that in mind. And if you are speaking very much futurist jargon, there might be some people who cannot follow. So let's try to find the middle way that everybody can follow our interventions. So without further ado, I hand over now to Jérôme. He is going to do a small setting the context or provocation, and other colleagues then will follow with additional comments.
Hello, everybody. As Joost said, the three organizations collaborated on producing a letter signed by 200 leaders in government, some in UN, some in universities, some in business, to ask the Secretary General to create a feasibility study for an Office of Strategic Risk. And this evolved out of another collaboration of our three organizations for what's called World Futures Day, and which is an open agenda. People talk around the whole world. We start off in New Zealand, and every hour the conversation moves to a different part around the world. And during that conversation, it was acknowledged that there's no single point to pull together everything we know or think we know about what could finish the human condition, what could finish us off. You know, we've heard about the asteroid and so forth, but what do we know about all this sort of stuff? And it was clear that there wasn't any one spot, because some people work on this one and one work on that one, but no one's pulling it all together. So that was the purpose for the letter. Parallel to that, the UN started putting together some foresight elements, which I'll talk about in a bit. And the strategic threat would be inside a periodic report that comes out on what is the status of existential threat. When I say existential, I mean existence, not a philosophical concept here of existentialism, but existence of humanity. Now, so in the process of this conversation with the UN Office of the Secretary General, we are also asked to put together, give me some examples of what you mean by existential threats. What are you talking about? So I put together a simple paragraph on 10 of them. And very quickly, I'll tick these off just to have a framework so that we know what we're really talking about. One is we know that the Earth's magnetic poles are weakening. And as they weaken, they shift. And then they go back to their strength almost. But we'll come back to that. So when you shift the poles, there's a period of time where the magnetic bubble around the Earth is not as strong. And that means a lot of radiation coming in from the sun, depending on how it works out, can make a lot of death. So that's one part of it. A second part of this threat is that the overall process of turning, which we've been doing for millions of years, the overall strength is slowly going down, you know, second law of thermodynamics and all of that. So in one study, and not only one, showed that in 500 years, the bubble might be weak enough that enough radiation would come in to finish us off. Now, that's just one study, but in any case, that's an example of an existential threat. A second, people talk about climate change as being an existential threat, but it's not simply the threat from the water going up or the temperature going up, although that's pretty serious if we have runaway later on. But even before that, when we get to, if we get to 1,000 parts per million, your currents in the ocean slow down to almost a stop, which means that the oxygen on the surface of the Earth doesn't get down to the bottom. It doesn't circulate. The oxygen doesn't circulate. When you don't have oxygen in water, a different kind of microorganism grows. And when it dies, it releases hydrogen sulfide. That's a poison. And that's one of the things that was caused at least one of the die-offs of civilization in the past. And we're headed in that direction unless we change. So the existential part of that is poison gas. 3, there was a problem talked about in the 70s that hasn't been talked about much lately. Long reason why that's the case. There's a lot of politics and economics involved in it. But the idea was that nanotechnology, if it is able to take carbon out of the air and reconfigure it into more of itself, what would stop it? And this is what we call the gray goo problem, that it could get out of control, cover up the entire Earth, and then we're toast. Now, the Millennium Project did a study on the future of science and technology. This was one of the issues. We talked to the heads of national labs in the United States. Every head of lab said, oh, don't worry about it, we can solve it. And yet we never heard a good solution. And if anybody wants to study this, it's deadly serious. In the 70s and 80s, there's a lot of papers about it. But then as we wanted to get money into the nanotech initiative, that got hushed up. And the numbers of papers dwindled down to almost nothing. We've got to take a look at that again because it hasn't gone away yet. 4, a single individual acting alone may very well be able to make a weapon of mass destruction. Technology gets smaller, cheaper, more effective. Well, extend that out in the sense of weapons. And eventually you have something there that can be a weapon of mass destruction. So that an individual acting alone, for example, a bioweapon could create it through synthetic biology, might be able to knock us off. We've had security issues with countries and groups, but we haven't gone down to the individual. It's a very tough one to deal with. 5, nuclear escalation. For 30 years, we didn't have to worry about nuclear brinkmanship. Well, guess what, folks? We've got a whole generation of people who've never played that game, and we're now in that game as we speak right now, unfortunately. 5, uncontrolled, more severe pandemics. Mutations can go way beyond what we've experienced in the past. There's no reason that can't happen. So imagine it much worse, and multi-mutations on top of that, getting out of control. 7, this is a bit hard to grasp. You all know about particle accelerators, running around, knocking out little pieces of matter in different directions and energy. There was a study that was going to be held at one of the US national labs in Long Island. And they concluded that there was a minute chance, a very small chance of opening up a black hole. Well, that would be a problem. So they decided not to do the experiment. But the very fact that that was a possibility and analyzed and stopped, what happens as we get more and more advanced stuff science worldwide and more accelerations of that? Could we finally mess up the fabric of the universe on which we are part? Don't know, but that's a potential threat out there. And again, all of these things we want to pull together the research worldwide. What do we know? What we don't know? And what's the research to fill the gap? 8, solar gamma ray bursts. People talk about the sun getting larger, way off in the future. Yeah, but if it gets a serious enough belch, we could be toast. And we wouldn't know about it, until like 9 minutes or so before. So, we're in a dangerous neighborhood. But it's been stable for a nice long time. Hopefully it will continue to be so. But we got to figure out how to forecast the sun. 9, asteroid or comet collision. That's the one most people are aware of. And I'm very happy to report that NASA has finally finished its design of an experiment to now go out to an asteroid and a little moon around the asteroid and hit it and nudge it off. These weren't going to hit the Earth anyway. But the idea is to pick one going off in a different direction and to learn the physics of nudging because you don't want to break it up, because you break it up, then it's a bunch of little rocks coming down. That's not a good idea. So you just want to nudge it. 10, loss of control over future forms of artificial intelligence. This is the most predictable near-term one, because we've got narrow intelligence we have today, no big deal. Oh, big deal, but it's not the existential threat. artificial general intelligence, which is like us. We can do novel problems. We're not just narrowly focused. Then the third one is superintelligence. That's beyond our understanding. Is artificial general intelligence, which has gone beyond our understanding, beyond our control. Now, and that's what Elon Musk and all those guys are warning about at the moment. But the issue here is a transition from narrow to general. If we don't get those initial conditions right, then how superintelligence emerges is beyond our control. And we just have to hope we're lucky. So that's something coming up in the next 10 years. Because we could have it as soon as 10 years. It may be 20 years, but we've got a major race going on right now between China, Japan, Russia, organized crime, the United States, on how to get to this point. China said they'll get it by 2030. Well, we'll see. In any case, it's within our lifetime. This will most likely occur. It's better than a 50-50 chance that all of us here will experience the transition from narrow to general. And if that transition isn't done right, we can lose control because we don't know how long it will take to go from general to super. It might never happen. And general intelligence may be just too complex to invent as well, by the way. None of these things are for sure. But as futurists, we're supposed to look at the range of possibilities. And this is within the range of possibilities in 10 to 20 years. So those are the 10 we sent off to the Secretary General and as examples to work on. And in the report that anybody can download, it's called Our Common Agenda. Just do a Google search, UN, Our Common Agenda, you can download it. And in there, item number 98 talks about existential risks we face. And they know the word, because I talk with them, they know what they're talking about. This is the first time it's calling for, let's pull this information together and make a report every so often, along with other sort of issues as well. But it's channeled in stone, but it doesn't mean it's going to happen. So there's 5 elements here that is in the foresight elements in the common agenda: periodic strategic foresight and global risk report. That's where the existential threats part. But there's 4 other parts here. And I plead with the futures community to contact your ministries of foreign affairs and get them to include this in their speech at the General Assembly next month. You know, heads of states come around from the world to give their speech. Why? Because if we don't endorse this, then it won't happen. How many reports have you seen that were brilliant and nothing happened? This could be one of those. This is our opportunity because this Secretary General set up his own foresight unit when he was Prime Minister of Portugal. So we got the right issues, we got the right Secretary General. So the futures community's got to get off its and contact your now. What is it that Eric is working for? Some sort of a foreign ministry, I think, his new job. The pressure is on. If we don't see that in the Norway speech, well, that's all I've got to say. Okay.
Thank you very much, Jerome, for setting the context. And I must admit, when I saw the list of the 10 examples, it reminds me of a number of movies I have seen over the last 30 years. I think some of the topics have been the topic of so-called science fiction movies, but I mean, now many of them are close to reality. So yeah, the only difference
to me, the only difference between science fiction and long-term futures research is we have to connect it to the present tense. Where the science fiction writer has the freedom to say, well, here we are in the year 3000. We can't do that in futures research.
So anyway, you mentioned already Eric's new position. We don't know 100% what he's doing. I understand he's based in my capital, I mean, my native home, Germany. Eric, before I ask you what is your take on what Jerome said, and also how the World Future Studies Federation is dealing currently with this topic of existential risks. Maybe you just let us know what's your influence like in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Norway.
Yeah, well, that's a very good question to ask. I mean, I've been working in the future field for many years, but I still also had a position within the public administrative system in Norway, and now also internationally at Norwegian embassy in Berlin. That also means that you have to balance between the political agenda in which you are in and the thinking and the ideas that you create as a futurist. And that's not always a very easy task to follow. So I could say a lot about these kind of things, but I think to respond to your question, I'm going to say first something about the WFSF, because if you look at the current discussions in the public discussion, it's mostly about sustainability and environmental strategic goals and things like that. It's a lot of the other points that Jerome mentioned is not necessarily a very clearly part of the public debate. So I think in that sense, the WFSF and me personally endorse and support this approach and this action also toward the UN system. But if you look at the WFS, WFS have almost 50, 60 years history. It was founded in 1973, but it's also the pre-founded in the conference in Oslo in 1967. And at that time, there were people who had some similar concerns like we have today. They were very concerned about the system thinking and also the technological, orientation, and was very concerned about the growth approaches and the economic development at that time, and the term as ecological thinking and sustainability came on the agenda in an increased way. So at that time, I think it was very important for people to engage with the future, in the sense that they had some new ideas about existential risk, but also not only risk, but also existential possibilities, as possibilities to avoid the risk. And I think that was one of the reasons behind the establishment of the WFSF at that time, and also the steady limited growth and the Club of Rome and all these kind of actors, which we are familiar with today. So, in my opinion, I think the topics that Jerome is addressing here is quite. You should follow that much more than we do. And I know that we have a lot of members who are from different ancient, different contexts, busy with several of these topics, but it's not necessarily organized in a proper way, also within the federation. So I think we should engage more also as a federation, as a network of futurists with these kind of threats. But when I'm talking about threats, we also have to look about the possibility to go beyond it, because I mean I'm a kid of the very negative catastrophe scenarios that was built in the 70s and 80s. I mean, it was very negative, and it's a very one-dimensional, because it's didn't focus very much on the positive possibility feasibility to avoid those kind of risks. So we really have to engage in scenarios in which we also create scenarios in which we avoid this kind of risk that Jerome is talking about. So yeah, I think on behalf of the Federation, I think we should engage more in these kind of topics and more in these kind of discussions, and we have to find a way to do that, and also to contribute more to the public debate, because the public debate in many ways is very one-dimensional. It's only a few of those topics that are dominating the public debate, and we should raise more of them. So that's the reason why I personally support this action, and also the WFSF is behind it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eric. And I heard also from Jerome before, he was saying we should talk to the foreign ministries before the summit. However, OECD is represented here. Duncan, you are working at the OECD with governments a lot, right? And you and your Foresight colleagues, I understand you are also working on existential risks and threats, that's correct? So how are you working on them? What is the focus of your work and what's the impact?
Great. Well, greetings, everyone, and thank you very much for the invitation and super questions. So, yeah, just first of all, a couple of words of introduction. So, I work at the I head up the Strategic Foresight Unit that's run out of the Secretary General's office at the OECD, and we really have a mandate to be supporting and championing strategic foresight and futures approaches across the OECD, and obviously advising our members on futures related issues that they should be paying attention to. We also convene the global government foresight community of over 200 public sector futurists from around the world. And we're increasingly working on leading and coordinating collaborative strategic foresight projects across both the OECD and across member governments, and in fact non-members of the OECD as well. We reach far beyond the membership of the OECD's own governments. So we've been we have a more general strategic foresight mandate, but we've been coming over recent years to be paying more attention to global catastrophic and existential risks. And we had a particular focus on that in one of the scenarios that we published in our 2030 Scenarios 2035 publication a couple of years ago, a scenario called Vulnerable Worlds, where really we looked at this issue that we may be facing as a global community, issues that require a near unprecedented level of global collaboration in order to manage them. So we are now in the process of conducting a deeper dive project looking specifically at existential risks, where we're trying to identify what some of the most important ones are that need greater attention by governments and decision makers around the world, and in particular how the OECD can contribute best to advancing the successful management of these. So I think Jerome set the stage well. We've been the way we are typically sort of putting this forward is with a simple message that, you know, humanity is only fairly recently in the 20th century created the technical ability to actually lead to its own extinction through the development of technologies such as nuclear weapons, of course, and in some extreme cases, you know, our carbon burning technologies as well. Under some extreme cases of climate change, this could actually be extinction level risk as well. But it would be wrong to think that it would be probably irresponsible to believe that these are the last technologies that we're going to create that would have that potential impact. And we need to be aware of developments in a variety of other areas that could bring, while bringing tremendous benefits, also bring tremendous risks, and assess very carefully how we can prepare for, respond, and avoid those risks. So the ones that we have on our radar from, I think, from Jerome's long list are really artificial intelligence, where there are a number of AI safety issues which are already being discussed and debated and not fully adequately managed, to say the least, in the present, but where we look out to potential developments in the coming years and decades, and you know, our assessment, the assessment of the community seems to be that is not prepared to be able to be successfully managing those, either from a technical point of view or from a governance point of view. Then another area is biorisk, where in fact a number of the potential threats and abilities are even here in the nearer term. And there are a number of steps underway to manage these, but again, our initial assessment is that far more needs to be done in order to have these managed effectively. And then we have a kind of a third bucket, which we are calling unknown unknowns, for lack of a better term right now, but which is really just the potential for new technologies to be emerging. Others we've seen, such as nano, have been, as Jerry mentioned, there's been a bit of a rise and decline in the interest in those. Not sure what the latest science suggests that really has the same risk potential as was once thought, but we need to keep a careful eye on that and on any other potential emerging technologies that could have a similar potential impact. So really what we're doing now is there are a number of areas of the OECD that either are related, working on related issues, or are touching on related issues and need to bring more of a sort of focused look at some of these extreme risks. And we're working with a number of our colleagues in those areas, and then their colleagues in governments and academia and think tanks around the world. And maybe I'll just quickly mention a couple of the areas, and then we can come back to that in more detail and discussion. But I mean, first of all, there's the whole sort of question of risk analysis. And I think one of the pieces that we can contribute at the OECD is trying to bring that sort of sober assessment of, what really is the level of the risk involved here, and how seriously should we be taking it, and how does that compare to the level of effort that is being made now to successfully manage these risks. And this is something that the risk management community, with their tools and expertise, can really bring to this discussion. We also have the whole technology governance, science and technology governance question. And this is really fascinating, where the experts on this at the OECD are saying, listen, we want to be gaining all the benefits we can from technologies. We're going to need technological advances to help us solve a whole number of pressing challenges facing humanity, not least of which is climate change. And but we also need to be doing this in a responsible way, where we are avoiding the extreme potential downsides of some of these technological developments. So how do we have a more proactive and effective, ultimately, framework for that kind of technology governance, both at the national level, and then, of course, most difficultly at at a coordinated global level. Then some of the issues around that are sort of differential technological development. And then another one is really the question about regulation. How does one regulate? How does one intervene? Both at the national level, and then again, more difficultly at the global level. How can we find that sort of right level of extremely effective global coordination where we need it in a targeted way on these crucial issues that matter most, whereas in others we can have a much more sort of decentralized approach. Finally, anticipatory governance itself. What's the sort of broader system within governments that's allowing them to be continually keeping track of these issues and ensuring that they're taking the necessary action, and it's actually moving from identifying the risk to action. And there's another piece that I think is specifically relevant to us as strategic foresight practitioners, which is really about identifying what could, we're going to need a strategy nationally and globally to manage these risks over the coming decades. But like all good strategies, it's going to face a huge amount of uncertainty and change and turbulence as the global context changes. And so we need to be thinking through what is some of the potential changes in the global context that could really have an impact and throw off our strategies, and really make sure that we're stress testing and future-proofing our strategies to be effective.
Thanks, Duncan. Let me. You raised a lot of good questions, and I think we could extend definitely a couple of more hours this conversation. But let me bring Rosa into the conversation here. Rosa, you are a well-known futurist in Brazil. I mean, I'm quite curious how the discussion on existential risk is actually held or done in Latin America, especially in Brazil. I must honestly say, when I work a lot on climate change, when I think about Brazil, I can't stop thinking about the pace of the disappearance of the Amazonas. But that's maybe my personal take. But can you tell us a little bit in your professional practice how you are working on existential risk, or what's the discussion like in Brazil?
Okay, it's a great pleasure to be here to listen from you wisdom people. And I will talk about a little bit something more invisible than what we are considering hiding. I'm talking about thinking. I'm thinking about the people who are not born yet. I'm a futurist, and I'm also a mother and a grandmother. And when I became a grandmother, I started thinking more about my role as an ancestor, as someone who is leaving some kind of legacy or footprints. And I think one of the top moral priorities for humankind is to think really about long-term future. When we talk about long-term future among us, is okay. It's just kind of obviously a term that we live together. We live working on this. But I'm talking about the general society, all institutions. And one of my main worries is about this caring society. We are living in a caring society. And all these lists Jerry has shared with us, and they are really scary. But what are we doing about this? What are you doing to face this scare? And we all know that a scared society is not able to face challenges. We all know, like in biology, plants do not grow in shadow, but we are in a society growing in shadow. And I love one of my main inspirations is 𝙀𝙁𝗙𝗙𝗏𝗧 work, the Image of the Future book. We are going towards where? We don't know. We have praised it more and more in this 20th century, the dystopias, rather than utopias. So I think that a scared society is a fragile society, is not flourishing. Even a scared society is a violent society too, to defense. The denialism is growing more and more. People are denying things. The more we have scary information, the more denying people are. So now, this is my provocation. What we are doing for the new generations. If we actually treated the lives of future generations, if our priority was that, okay, to work for them. I'm not talking about those who are living, or also, only those who are living now. I'm talking about those who are coming, okay? So if we really, if we worked about that, what would be our priorities? I think that our priorities would change. And now, one of the solutions, I don't know if I can say solution, but one of the paths to face that is really to create a new model of education. I am representing the Teach the Future movement created by Peter Bishop in 2014. And I'm really, we are integrating Foresight in primary schools, which sounds a little weird because children do not have sense of time, but I'm getting more and more surprised from them because they are very clever, they are empty brains, creativity. And we're also teaching Foresight in high schools, okay? So this is one of the paths because as we teach history, we should urgently teach the future, how people can face challenges, but not leave to the new generations the word. We are 6 generations together for the first time in history, but we still think about leaving them the word. No, the word is from them to us. So we have to hold hands in our public discourses. And all United Nations, the Common Agenda, Jerry, raised my attention very positively, mainly because they are prioritizing new generations dialogues and also intergenerational. So I think this is something that I would like to share. It's not visible. People don't talk much about that, but we have really to cure this short-termism disease we have. When we think more and more about people who are coming, our grandchildren, our neighbors, the children of the world, and maybe we will change our focus because we forget to talk about the people who are not existing yet. We forget about the future that we are taking from them, and we are taking from them. You know, like it's a very common word now. We are colonizing the space of thinking and the space of living. So let's put young people on the table. They are very, we always talk about them. We don't talk with them. And there are very few organizations. There are very few institutions that put young people on board. We have some examples in Wales, in England, Japan, but very, very few. So it is urgent to put them on board. I think that I don't have any solution about this eight items list that Jerry has shared, but we have something to do with strengthening people, making the society alive. And the last thing I'd like to share, one more worry, is that the imaginary society. What kind of images of the future are we living with? So what about changing this imagery? What about putting light into that? I'm not against dystopia, okay? I'm not against dystopia, but I'm against excessive dystopia, because excessive dystopia can have the power of being replicated in behavior and in experiences. So we are living this. We are living in a dystopian society. So maybe I'm being very poetical. I think we need poetry. I think we need dreaming. But futurist is not only about machines. We are humans. And as humans, we need to talk about our inner world, our necessity of oxygen in our minds, in our hopes. It is urgent to regain hope, to refresh imagery, to put new people, new generations on the conversation. For instance, here, I would like to see many young people, many teenagers here talking with us. We don't talk with them, we just talk about them. I think this is something that I would like to share. And for sure, if we don't work together, the young, the oldest, because we are living more and more, we have technology to make people together, from the youth to the elders, and we have a society that is now in a very growing narrative with inclusion, liquidity. So we are the same. We are becoming a borderless generational society. Let's work together, put them on board. That's what I'd like to share.
Thank you very much, Rosa. And maybe it's just my narrow view, but in Asia, we have a lot of initiatives taking place in the moment to engage with youth. But if we are really honest, it's always a small group, a small number of young people. Yes, and a lot of tokenism is there as well. But I completely agree with you, positive images of the future, although sometimes I must agree, it's difficult even for me to be a positive futurist. And I understand when I joined the Futures Fold many years back that futurists should by definition be optimists, but in the Pollack game, I always find myself a little bit on the wrong side. Having said that, I think my colleague and friend Sherman is a more positive person than I am. he also thinks a lot about the future. I think he also has a young son, like me having a young daughter. So Sherman, I think everybody shared their insights now. I will just hand over to you to let you make some remarks. And I'm already seeing we are reaching the end of the session. I had prepared so many nice questions. I was hoping for a lot of questions in the audience. I don't know if we can go a few minutes over time for the people who can stay on. But Sherman, please, over to you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, just trying to make sense of what has been said, by everyone. And it reminds me of a Spanish philosopher in the 18th century. He said that life has always been about the collision of the future with the future, right? That life has always been a collision with the future, that it's a constant struggle between life and death, that it's a constant struggle between light and darkness, and existence and non-existence, and life, trying to some sort of push itself to exist, despite the destruction that is occurring from the organism, microorganism level to superorganism and cosmos. That has always been, the take of many philosophers about life, and our capacity to actually, exist, in the last thousands of years. It's existential risk perhaps is not really that novel or unique, or perhaps that has just been accentuated by the current pandemic that has rocked everyone and, rock our senses, in the sense that perhaps before the pandemic, we were underestimating the potentiality of risk to disrupt the way we live, the way we work, the way we connect, the way we innovate and strategize and make sense as a global community. In fact, I've been working as a risk manager for companies and organizations, including governments, in the last 7 years. And what I've seen before the pandemic was that the way we see risk was pretty much conservative, right? Conservative in the sense that we don't want to isolate ourselves, in the way we do and create value because we're too pessimistic about things. And the tendency was back then is that when we tend to shock or surprise people with the way we post perhaps dystopian future, is that you might lose your funding, right? Because you don't want to shock, the CEOs and governments about, the way they see things, like those informed and driven by continued economic growth. But then again, of course, most of the emergency management and crisis management scenarios were too conservative, in the sense that it was not planetary and global in terms of risk, right? They were so comfortable in the sense that risk or existential risk could only happen at the local level. Like if a pandemic occurs in the Philippines, or perhaps a cyber attack occurs in a particular government, that would not affect Europe or US or China or Taiwan for that matter. But then perhaps we have totally forgotten about, the planetary risk that might engulf us in the process. And then, in fact, these existential risks are not necessarily black swan events, right? Like unknown to us. In fact, in the book of Michelle Walker, she said that there are gray rhinos that are in front of us, that perhaps we have underestimated all of these things. We know that they are in front of us, but we have the tendency to ignore them, right? Ignore them in the sense that it's highly plausible, highly probable events. When they occur, we know that they are highly impactful, but we're not having those conversations. Now, but what I'm trying to drive at here is that now that we're having conversation about existential risk and threats, is that perhaps now is about the time to rethink our relationship with risk, right? Now is the time that perhaps, as Rosa have said intimately, that perhaps now is the time to look at ourselves as decision makers, as leaders, as organization and communities, that as human beings, and of course, if you try to look at from a planetary point of view, that includes the animals, the rivers, the plants, and among other things that exist, from the smallest organism to the biggest, cosmos that enables life to exist in the universe, is that perhaps we need to reimagine the way we relate with risk concepts and events and calamities, right? Perhaps we see it previously in the context of, okay, this is this topic, but can risk empower us in the sense that because we treasure life, right? And in fact, that is the purpose of crisis management and business continuity and strategic management. I've seen in the past in many reports published by the World Economic Forum, it's just now apparently accentuated that globally, we are now considering integrating not just those risks that has always been in our risk registers, like companies and governments have always had this risk assessment that includes risks that are highly probable, but not necessarily highly impactful, pretty quite conservative, that we get to have a conversation about these things every year. In fact, for risk managers and risk management, they have listed like around 100 to 150 risks that companies and governments has to deal with annually, and they tend to rank all of these things. But then existential risk has never been in the list, right? It's never been there, right? Because these are science fiction stuff, or these are the things that you cannot actually address. But the issue is now, where can futurists and foresight practitioner, create value, for our clients, stakeholders, and the people that we serve when we have conversation and accentuate existential risk and threats? Would this put off people? But in what ways can futurists and foresight practitioners create value out of existential risk and threats and create a far more safer world if indeed they occur, or perhaps if we have the opportunity to actually prevent it, at least mitigate the implications and impact, because it has definitely the potential to kill many tomorrows, like economic potentialities, political, technological, social, among other types of, if you try to put it in the context of systems thinking, is that, can existential risk amplify our ability and capability to create wealth, safety, and security and welfare for everyone? Like, can we use this as a premise for public policy to stress test current policies in order for them to be, perhaps to use the word of Nicholas Taleb, anti-fragile future or anti-fragile visions of the future? Because preferred future are not necessarily risk-proof, right? Optimism is not necessarily future-proof, right? They might be in many ways vulnerable as well if you don't stress test it. So perhaps, to conclude this is on what I'm saying is that futurists and foresight practitioners all around the world at the personal, professional, and organizational level, need to have a conversation about these things. And perhaps if we have the opportunity to actually influence and convince, or inspire communities around the world, to take on these conversations about disruptions and perhaps, increase our ability to actually innovate from it. Yes.
Thank you very much, Sherman. I mean, I'm looking at the chat and I see about a very engaging audience here, and I think there are about 20 topics we could organize more Friends of Foresight sessions with alone. I mean, starting with, for example, what Rosa has said and about youth and so on. A lot of people responded to that. I wanted to give the chance to Jérôme, and I want to continue a few minutes longer if you don't mind. Everybody was only able to give literally one statement, and maybe just one quick round with all of you responding to each other about one point you found very interesting. But before I hand over to Jérôme, I also wanted to know this UN office you have been proposing with the colleagues. Is it, besides that you need support for these 5 things, the UN,
yes.
5 bullet points you have, how optimistic
yes.
are you that this is coming? So, and then secondly, maybe any point you want to respond to choose one, and I will do a
Yeah,
quick
okay.
round with everybody.
Yeah, as most of you know here, I'm a big fan of not just doing negative, but negative and positive together, balanced and all that. However, if you get, and the existential strategy is just like a blind spot to a large degree in future research, where you're just filling up an area that we got to improve. This is not the whole game. This is just cleaning up the shop. But the thing that I would encourage you to tell other people, like, so, oh my God, this is so terrible, I can't want to think about it, whatever that cloud chamber of response you might get, this I found as being very effective. Historians have more or less said, when two or more great powers confront each other, they use the weapons of the day. By that rule of thumb, we shouldn't be alive today. World War III between Moscow and Washington was supposed to have occurred. We all know, you ask an audience during that time, how many think it's going to occur? Most of the hands go up. Yeah, it's inevitable. You know, this is the way it is. You know, okay. Well, we turned that trend around. We learned how to manage the situation, which is amazing when you think about the whole mass of history. We changed one of the basic trends of humanity. Okay, well, if we can do that, figure out how to manage classified weapon systems between two enemies going against each other, and we've got it and slowly pushed it down. Now we're back in the conversation again, but for 30 years, it held pretty well.
Thank you, Jerome. Maybe a quick comment from Eric, and then we go the same sequence again, and then.
Yeah, well, first of all, I share the somehow also positive aspect of what Jerome is advocating, and also as was said about you have to look at the possibilities in the more creative and interesting ways. I just want one minor remark of a strategy, in the sense that we are approaching the UN system, and we are approaching government through our networks, if it's OECD, or it could also be other international, UNESCO, for example. So my question is, how do you relate to media in this sense? I mean, could that be a point? Because we have in the Federation have started collaboration with something we call the Future Television, in which we also are long-term aiming at being more present in more conventional media contexts. And I think we should also think about that possibility more than we have done. But I share, I think it's absolutely very interesting adventure here, and I think the WFS are going to support it. And if I can do something in my new role, I don't know, it's not up to me, but well, I think government anticipatory governance is also a very, very important issue in this sense.
Thank you very much, Eric. Duncan.
Okay, great. Well, I think I just want to focus on one of the points that Sherman raised, which is, really for us as a community of strategic foresight practitioners and futurists, what is the role that we can play? I mean, this is going to be a massive and incredibly complex and important endeavor, trying to wrestle some of these emerging risks to the ground and stay on top of them. And I think there are some specific, it's certainly going to go much beyond the foresight community in terms of what's needed, but I think there's some key roles for futurists in this that are really aligned with our niche and expertise. And I think that's, some of those are really around continuing our role of challenging assumptions. I mean, the community of experts around all of these issues are just like any other community of experts. They're liable to kind of have a certain view of how things are going to be and ignore other possibilities. And I think it's really, we need to continue to play our role to be saying, well, what if this and what if that? to future-proof, and to broaden the conversation. I think it's also important that we can play that role that's been talked about building the positive aspirational futures. That, why we're all doing this is because there's incredibly positive potential future for humanity if and beyond if we're able to manage these risks. So it's important to keep articulating those positive vision. I think also broadening the conversation is incredibly important. It's within a fairly narrow part of this society discussing this now. It really needs to be taken out into a number of groups and thought through to make sure that we're reflecting all those perspectives in designing our strategies to address these risks. And finally, I think there are a whole bunch of broader public policy issues that are not necessarily directly related to the risks, but we're calling them risk factors. And these are whether it's questions like rising inequalities or misinformation or other factors in society that could make a lot of these risks more likely to occur if we don't manage them correctly. I mean, geopolitical tensions being another one. So these are all issues where Foresight can also play an incredibly valuable role in helping manage those issues, which then by extension support the successful management of existential risks. So I'm sure there are many more, but there's just a few threads to be thinking on as we go forward.
Thank you very much, Duncan. Rosa.
Yeah, I would like to point out that someone has asked about the media. I think that we have to pay attention to what is happening now in the economic system. We have been in the first time of history having the economic system criticizing the economy. Since the 2 years ago, a lot of corporations around the table, the Economic Forum taking place of the World Social Forum. So the Financial Times publishing a whole book about the reset of capitalism. So as if it was impossible, we are looking at some changes in there, not properly from essential purpose, but a financial world is putting money on investing in ESG and okay. So talking about media, sometimes it seems so impossible to change the media perspectives, but I think it is time to discuss about that. I think it is important to put this subject on the table because media is like a nervous system of the world. So the media is really surrounding negative sides, not putting alternatives, just putting the facts, not the possibilities. And Eric has talked about the Futures Television, which is a great initiative. Why don't questioning about talking with the media, futurists and in the media talking with futurists to include scenarios, to include possibilities, alternatives, like Jerry publishes in the Millennium Project, the State of the Future, which doesn't have only problems, but also alternatives, solutions. So it is a public debate. I think that after all, I've listened from you. It's a major challenge to talk about people who produce images, people who produce messages, and any kind of production that will make an instrument to make society walk towards solutions and not being so, scared.
Thank you very much, Rosa. So Sherman, your final thoughts.
I'm seeing two things here. Like one is that if you would like to see it in terms of polarity, like of course a tug of war between emergence and emergencies, right? So it depends on us, as a global community, whether we want to leverage on existential risk and threats as an asset and resource for emergence to create more better systems, more anti-fragile visions of the future, and innovations that are practically adaptive, regardless of the changes that are occurring, be the implications are good or bad, right? So I think resilience must always be an integral aspect of emergence, and it could also be seen as a push for emergence, and as well as a pool of emergencies, right? Because all of these things could occur. It depends on on the system that we create. Because I think human society and human civilizations, government in particular, considering its convening power to actually generate and consolidate and create systems out of it, is the ability and capability of human systems to actually respond and deal with this existential risk and threats. And I believe, at least in the context of advocacy, futurists and foresight practitioners can up on the ante in terms of climate change, right? Among other existential risk in the process. And another thing is that, of course, as mentioned by Duncan, it's not just us, right? The futurist and foresight community, pushing all of this conversation. I am seeing a lot of occurrence wherein economists, scientists, innovators, engineers, designers, police, intellectuals, are starting to gain or draw some interest as far as using futures and foresight tools and methods as a toolkit, as part of their ways of innovating and strategizing things. And in the same manner, a futurist and foresight practitioner has to find ways by which we create avenues for collaboration between futurists and economists, right? A futurist and innovators or designer, among other things. And I think that is emerging as well. And it's becoming more apparent, in many of, the projects, perhaps, in the programs that we have. And in fact, for the Association of Professional Futurists, that has always been our view of providing opportunities to develop professional foresight capacities, in the sense that other disciplines do respect our tools and methods and our approaches, to gain a reputation and create a more significant impact and influence as far as public policy and or corporate governance is concerned. I think the futures and foresight community is moving into a new era as well, right? And this has been the conversation that we've had during the Global Foresight Summit with Jerome and Eric and the other foresight futures community, helping facilitate all of these things and lead the way. We're in perhaps futures and foresight organization or foresight organization has to operate beyond the club. Right, that is something that we need to look at. Is it a time that we go beyond hovering just our own communities, like we invest on the tools and methods, among other things, that perhaps we have to take a larger perspective and a larger view that futurist moves beyond the club, as Swahil has mentioned, that is one potential trajectory, and collaborate with the larger community. And I think that's possible now, perhaps in the next 5 to 10 years. And existential risk definitely should be a part of our menu moving forward, right? To empower people and engage them in a way that we become more resilient and sustainable in the process.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I think you made a lot of points. I don't want to reiterate anything of that except the plea by Jerome. If you have an influence on the United Nations agenda and the summit next month, so please make use of that. Make sure we have to do our job as futurists and foresight practitioners and put this topic of existential risks also on the menu of other organizations, not on our own menu. Secondly, everybody I think in this room agrees this was just the beginning of a conversation. And I think there are so many more aspects we have to dig deeper about. Actually, this morning when I thought about this evening session, I mean, for me, it's evening now, I saw an article by the Byte that actually the NASA is about to launch I think a test deflecting a killer asteroid. And I thought, when I looked at the list of Jerome's 10 in preparation, I thought, okay, there is at least something happening, but I think there is much more to be done. So without further ado, I hope we all agree that we should prepare for existential risks and threats much more. We all agree that we as a community have to do much more. We all agree that these risks are a reality and undoubtedly exists. We cannot let ourselves be paralyzed by fear. I think I speak also in a way Rosa has reminded us, we shouldn't be paralyzed by fear and uncertainty. Actually, the best way to create the future is to use uncertainty as our asset and tool to prepare today. I also got a lot of ideas personally, and I'm sure you all have some ideas about using science fiction more for preparing the communities for this kind of topic and so on and so on. I stop here, but before everybody leaves, I want to do something I haven't agreed with colleagues here. Let's do a chat burst. Can I hear one key takeaway all from you? I want to have 69 or 60, at least 60 key takeaways. Write in the chat before you leave, what is your one key takeaway or one insight from the conversation today, so that we have 60 great quotes. I saw so many colleagues, and if I just look at the little videos on top of the speakers here, I see Richard Young, I see Brian Alexander, I see 𝙀𝙬𝙄𝙎𝙆, I see many colleagues. I saw a lot of colleagues from here, from my Asia Pacific community. Please give us one quote. And I know that many of you should and could have joined the conversation and have contributed in a tremendous way. Unfortunately, we had only 1 hour and 16 minutes today.
Will the chat comments be part of the video record of this? Yeah, okay. Because if people are putting stuff in, they might as well know that it's going to be recorded somehow.
So I think otherwise, thanks for joining us today. Please give a big virtual hand to our 5 colleagues who joined the panel. And of course, also thanks to all of you who stayed with us until the end. And I don't know, shall we take a group picture? I don't know if you do that, Nicole. I see sometimes on Sherman's APF events, there are always these huge amounts of videos. So if you can switch on your webcam, I guess, Nicole, you're going to take some pictures, right? You have to probably go through. I hope you don't mind if you appear on some of the futurist organizations' website that you were there. I see also Mara, great to see you. Finally, Sylvain from Luxembourg. I mean, there's so many people. I mean, I guess it's a great community we have here today.
Okay, everybody.
Okay, so we all smile.
Smiling. Yes. Thank you, Joost. I'm gonna count down, and we have several screens, so just keep your beautiful smile on your face. So 1, 2, 3, the first screen. Second screen. 1, 2, 3.
People probably don't know if you're on the first, second, or third screen, but keep smiling.
The last screen.
In my face-to-face workshop today, I didn't see anybody smiling because everybody was wearing a mask. So it's nice to see some people smiling. So thanks again to Jerome, to Rosa, to Eric, to Duncan, and of course to Sherman, as well as Nicole, for hosting the session. Thanks, and I hope we can continue the conversation in virtual or face-to-face or somewhere in the world. So that's it for today. Stay safe, stay healthy, and thanks for joining in today.
And thank you to thank you to you, Josh. Great moderator.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you very much.
Let's catch up about Germany at one time. Let's catch up about Germany by occasion.
I thought we don't talk about pessimistic things.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
I want to talk about positive things.
Something about that. Yeah.
I will get in touch with you, Eric. And
yeah, perfect.
Nice to see so many friends here.
Okay.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye, Rosa.